Donald Trump, though, is a great survivor, and he is extremely lucky in one thing and one aspect that didn't spare Prince Andrew and Peter Mandelson, which is that he did, by all accounts, stop associating with Jeffrey Epstein, possibly for completely reasons of his own, but he stopped associating with Epstein before he was a known sex offender. Whereas I'm sorry to say that Lord Mandelson and Prince Andrew didn't.
Now, while here in the UK there is continued focus on Prince Andrew, the Times revealing tonight that he's not paid rent on his luxury mansion at Windsor since 2003. But in the United States, there is renewed pressure for the release of more of the files on the sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The Democrats need 218 signatures to secure a vote on the release of the documents in the House of Representatives, and they are currently one signature short. Well, let's talk to Sarah Baxter, Director of the Marie Colvin Centre for International Reporting. Good evening to you, Sarah.
Hello, Carol.
Let me just ask you, first of all, clearly the Jeffrey Epstein story has been a hugely significant one across the United States. What about the latest moves to strip Prince Andrew of his title, the Duke of York, but the continuing focus on his behaviour?
Well, of course, Americans are always interested in the royal family, but they're not as interested as in Prince Andrew as you might think. I think this is for two reasons. I don't think Americans fully get the difference between being stripped of your title of Duke of York and being left with Prince Andrew, which sounds like Prince Charming and sounds like a lot of better title than a duke. And secondly, they don't want to talk about Jeffrey Epstein, particularly if they're on the Republican side. So there's a lot less fuss about this than you'd think. Now, of course, the Democrats do want the release of the so-called Epstein files and are definitely pushing for that. And they have the support of a few Republicans, a very small number, led by Thomas Massie, who, by the way, is not running for Congress again in the midterm elections because this is such a career killer for him to oppose Donald Trump. Donald Trump has told the MAGA faithful he wants to hear nothing more about Epstein. Ghislaine Maxwell has been moved to a much nicer prison and may indeed in due course be pardoned. Who knows? But you mentioned that Congress wants to force a vote and is only one vote away. Well, this is interesting, Carol, because there is a Democratic Congresswoman called Adelita Grijalva from Arizona who is waiting to be seated. But the Speaker of the House absolutely adamantly refuses to seat her while the government shutdown continues. So, of course, people are crying foul and saying it's because the Speaker of the House, a Republican, Mike Johnson, doesn't want the Epstein files released and wants to spare Donald Trump that embarrassment, which, is probably true, but sounds kind of conspiratorial. Adelita Grijalva said she used to think that surely was a conspiracy theory, but it's been 4 weeks since she was elected Congresswoman, and not to be sworn in is looking pretty fishy now.
So that continuing effort to get more documents released is essentially on hold during the continuing shutdown. And I mean, you mentioned President Trump there, and we know that he did have a friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. He says he ended that before Epstein was convicted of sex offences. But I mean, President Trump has faced an awful lot of questions about this. They seem to have died down a bit in the last few days, but he had during his campaign promised to release all the Epstein files, and he actually hasn't.
Yeah, I think deep down, MAGA feels betrayed over this, but they're shutting up for now because Donald Trump is so insistent that they must. But I don't think they're happy about it. So this could flare up at any moment. And of course, the Epstein scandal has waxed and waned over the years. Prince Andrew has never been able to shake himself free of it. It came back to bite Peter Mandelson, who's no longer the UK ambassador to the US. It's been damaging people for over a decade. And of course, Virginia Giuffre's memoir, very sad memoir, of her abuse at the hands of Jeffrey Epstein and his friends is really harrowing and is being published posthumously, as you know. So there's a very sad story there that seems to never end. If
Yeah,
anyone
and
could
I
get
mean
away
that
with
book
it,
is. Yeah, I was just going to say
yeah.
that that book, of course, is finally published tomorrow. Extracts have already been released, and some journalists seem to have got hold of earlier copies of it. And Virginia Giuffre herself warns. I know this is a lot to take in, the violence, the bad decisions, the self-harm, she writes, but please don't stop reading. And even though much of what she describes is events that we have heard about beforehand, when you read the extracts, which I have done, I haven't read the whole book, but the extracts which were released in advance, it is quite a harrowing read, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And there was an article by the ghostwriter who helped her, Amy Wallace, in the New York Times this week, pointing out that the victims of sex abuse are always forced to kind of go through astonishing public scrutiny where they have to justify themselves over and over again in the face of disbelief. And I think that was very, very hard for Virginia Giuffre, who was a very young girl with a sad history, when she fell into Epstein and Maxwell's clutches. Donald Trump, though, is a great survivor, and he is extremely lucky in one thing and one aspect that didn't spare Prince Andrew and Peter Mandelson, which is that he did, by all accounts, stop associating with Jeffrey Epstein, possibly for completely reasons of his own, but he stopped associating with Epstein before he was a known sex offender. Whereas I'm sorry to say that Lord Mandelson and Prince Andrew didn't. And that is one of the reasons, I think, why Donald Trump is more protected from this scandal than they are. But if he were to pardon Ghislaine Maxwell, for example, that would be a hugely unpopular decision.
Sarah Baxter, Director of the Marie Colvin Centre for International Reporting. Great to speak to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Carol.
Jamie's got in touch, says here, Prince Andrew did nothing wrong and never met Virginia Roberts. Why did he hand over 12 million quid? Also think about this one. Imagine if Andrew was the older brother and the constitutional crisis the country would be in now. Thanks for that, Jamie. Virginia Roberts, of course, now Virginia